We gather together today as the dear family and friends of Lillian Goldberg. As we mourn her loss, must also celebrate the full, rich life she led. Death has taken our beloved Lillian. Friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence there is lamentation. In their tears there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, and be with them. For her love that united us in life and which death cannot sever. For her companionship which we shared along life's path and which still continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of her heart and her mind which brought us joy and happiness and now become a precious heritage of the Spirit. For all these and more, God, we give you our praise. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai Natan v'nai lekach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevarach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. An ancient people were well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow not strangers to us. Yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and there is strength in faith. With Job we say, Adonai Natan, God, you have given. You gave us a loved one who will not be forgotten. For all was good and enduring in her life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. A poem entitled My Hereafter. Do not come when I am dead to sit beside a low green mound or bring the first daffodils, because I love them so. For I shall not be there. You cannot find me there. I will look up at you from the eyes of little children. I will bend to meet you in the swaying boughs of bud-thrilled trees and caress you with the passionate sweep of storm-filled winds. I will give you strength in your upward tread of everlasting hills. I will cool your tired body in the flow of the river. I will warm your work-glorified hands through the glow of the winter fire. I will soothe you into forgetfulness to the drop, drop of the rain on the roof. I will speak to you out of the rhymes of the masters. I will dance with you in the lilt of the violin and make your heart leap with the bursting cadence of the organ. I will flood your soul with the flaming radiance of the sunrise and bring you peace in the tender rose and gold of the after sunset. All these have made me happy. They are a part of me, and I shall become a part of them. Take time to talk, for you may ask of all things unknown to you. Take time to laugh, for smiles relinquish sorrow and spread happiness. Take time to think, for the realm of knowledge is never ending. Take time to see, for there is beauty in every part of the world around you. Take time to feel, for the emotions of your heart often control the reasoning of your mind. Take time to live, for each day is filled with new opportunities that will be gone tomorrow. Take time to dream, for survival is forever challenging the powers of your imagination. Take time to love, for the sharing of all these things is the true miracle of life. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, ben al desha yar bitseni, al me menachot yanachaleni. Please join me now in the familiar words of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters, and restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. The Baal Shem Tov, the Hasidic Rebbe, once observed that there are 3 ways to mourn. The first is with tears, the second is with silence, and the third is with song. When we mourn someone truly beloved, we experience all 3. Tears at first, then silence as our grief settles more deeply, and finally song as we're able to celebrate the memories we hold deep in our hearts. So today's a time for tears as we say our final goodbyes to Lillian. We'll each remember her in our own way. Ken, you remember Lillian as your beloved wife. Rachel and Victor and Aaron will remember Lillian as your loving mother. Lillian was adoring great-grandmother to Alex and Thomas, and a dear sister and sister-in-law to John and Wendy and Phil and Florence. Lillian was born on November 6, 1948, to David and Sarah Weil. Lillian's parents brought her to the United States when she was just 8 or 9 months old. They settled in the Collinswood area in 1949. 5 years later, her father physically helped to build their new house in South Euclid. Lillian graduated from Brush High School in 1966 and went on to study English. Lillian met her beloved Ken, and they were married on December 26, 1976, at Park Synagogue in Kangerser Hall. As an architect, Ken preferred the sanctuary at Park, but they wouldn't allow them to have a freestanding chuppah in the sanctuary. So, of course, Lillian and Ken chose the more traditional path and held their wedding in Kangerser. But later, Rachel and Victor were married in the sanctuary with a chuppah. Lillian and Ken gave birth to Rachel in 1978 and then Aaron in 1982. They raised their children in Cleveland Heights. When the kids were little, they enjoyed going out shopping at Severance or later to Beechwood Place. But Lillian also liked to take Rachel and Aaron to plays and to art openings and shows. The whole family enjoyed going on cultural experiences together, such as a trip to the Amish country or the Apple Butter Festival. The only time they went out of town was to visit Ken's family in Rochester, New York. Lillian and Ken enjoyed more traveling when the kids were out of the house. One Saturday night a month, Lillian and Ken took turns choosing what to do: a restaurant, a movie, other entertainment, and the other went along. Lillian was a writer and loved to read until her eyesight declined. She was a member of the National Council of Jewish Women and volunteered at their thrift store. Lillian enjoyed coming to Shabbat services at Park regularly, and she liked Jewish music. When I visited Lillian when she was in a coma due to West Nile virus 6 years ago, and more recently at Windsor Heights, I would sing Jewish songs to her, and she always seemed to respond. Throughout her life, Lillian was strong-willed and had strong opinions, and she was not afraid to share them. She mellowed a bit in her later years. Rachel so appreciates how her father and brother took such good care of her mother here in Cleveland. They tried to bring joy to her days. Ken took her out of Windsor Heights on outings, to restaurants that were meaningful to her, to part of her 50th high school reunion, and most recently to the Israel Fest at the JCC just a month ago. He tried to open up her small world. Just last Sunday, Rachel's boys had a nice visit with their grandmother. Alex played the piano for her, and Thomas played the ukulele. Thomas was an early reader, and Lillian loved how he read books to her. Last year during a visit, they were able to go out into the courtyard and play horseshoes together. So today may be a time for tears. We are saddened by the loss of Lillian, but we learned much from her, especially how to care for one another. Let these tears serve to strengthen and uphold you as a family. There's a story in our tradition about a rabbi who once passed an old woman planting trees. "Woman," he called, "why are you planting those trees? You'll never live to see them blossom." But the woman replied, "My ancestors planted trees, not for themselves but for us, that we might enjoy their shade and their fruit. I too do the same for all those who will come after me." Lillian planted an orchard for each one of us, an orchard filled with devotion and with love, and these will always be here for us. We must be grateful that we're able to be a part in Lillian's life. Tomorrow there'll be fewer tears, more silence. As the Baal Shem Tov noted, it'll be a time for pondering, a time for contemplation. Lillian will become a greater part of our characters and our beings as we integrate the memories and the values she taught us into our own selves. But finally, there'll come a time for song. The time will come when we can celebrate Lillian, we recall all that we learned from her and how she touched each of our lives. May she rest in peace. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. May the memory of Lillian Goldberg be a blessing. Amen. I'd now like to invite members of Lillian's family to speak. First, we'll hear from her husband, Ken.
What can I say about Lillian? My honey bunch and I were together 42 years. Lillian entered this world in a survivors' camp in Fernwald, Germany, in Bavaria. One grandmother had died before the war, and Lillian's parents, originally from Czechoslovakia, had lost their other parents and most of their siblings. However, David and Sarah, like many other young Jewish adults there, were busy creating brand new lives out of the ashes and had a community, with socializing and other niceties of daily life. The Wiles were considering Israel or the United States to emigrate to. He more for the U.S., where he had an uncle's family, her more for Israel, where she had two brothers and a sister's families. The U.S. option won out when they settled in Cleveland, bringing among other limited belongings 2 oil portraits, one of infant Lillian, the other of David's mother based on an old photo, and a set of Rosenthal china. We have recently found information on the portrait painter who had a career in Munich and later came to the U.S. In Cleveland, a couple with infant Lillian made a new life for themselves. In a strange country, with David's becoming a master plasterer, Sarah eventually becoming a geriatric nurse's aide, later worked in school and club dining facilities, and eventually as a beloved daycare worker. They settled in South Euclid, where David did a lot of the work for the construction of their new home, and got involved in Workman's Circle and what became Warrensville Center Synagogue. Lillian attended Brush High, where she was among the top students in her class. She grew up with her brother John, but no grandparents and only a few nearby aunts, uncles, and cousins, with some more in the U.S. and Israel. The families had some good times together, but they were small in number. Lillian went to the University of Michigan, majoring in English. She got her B.A. in English at Cleveland State and then earned a master's in library science at Kent State. Lillian loved books and had excellent English skills, even though she came from a family who knew little English before coming to Cleveland. When Lillian's vision became such that she could no longer read without great effort, she turned to talking books. She would also always enjoy she always enjoyed word games. When I met Lillian at a Case Hillel brunch, she was living in Massillon and responsible for the library at Massillon State Hospital. She moved back to Cleveland before our wedding and continued on at Cleveland State, heading for another master's in English. Lillian enjoyed good health for many years, but eventually went through a series of major medical problems, including vision, the need of a kidney transplant, whereas our daughter Rachel was the donor, and the notorious West Nile disease. It's quite unbelievable that what one mosquito can do to people's lives. However, sometimes it seemed Lillian had 9 lives like a cat. For many years, Lillian took a variety of part-time jobs as well as volunteer opportunities. Lillian wanted to work but also be a homemaker and raise 2 children. Interestingly, Rachel and Aaron both majored in English in college, like Lillian. Lillian deserved a great deal of credit for all that Rachel and Aaron have become. We're so grateful Lillian got to know her grandsons, Alex and Thomas, but it's such a shame they didn't get to know each other longer. She had really wanted so much to be a good, loving grandmother. Hopefully the boys will be inspired over the years by the attributes and qualities Lillian would like promoted and handed down. One of Lillian's passions was writing. She wrote novellas, short stories, a memoir, and surely more, always wanting to, but never quite succeeding in getting them officially published. She was involved with various book and writing clubs over the years. Sometimes with all her intelligence, Lillian had opinions that didn't concur with the general trends in society, and even though I might not have seen her side at the time, for some of these, such as technology going too far in some areas, I now think she might well have been right. Lillian loved music in general and used to say, "Music is proof there is a God." She greatly appreciated the music of Vivaldi to J.S. Bach, Gershwin to Cole Porter, the Beatles and Crosby, Stills and Nash, to Sting to Gordon Lightfoot. In fact, we attended a Gordon Lightfoot concert at Blossom the day I had proposed to her in the gardens of Stan Hewitt Hall in Akron. Lillian played the violin for many years in public school and participated in the school orchestras. In our later years of long-distance travel, we always made sure to experience one or more of the top jazz or blues venues in that city. What else was major in Lillian's life? Would you have guessed that Lillian owned an extensive collection of Katie Keene comic books? In Lillian's childhood years, one could send in fashion ideas for this glamorous comic heroine. Lillian loved sewing. She created an exquisite 18th century style dress to wear at a bicentennial celebration in 1976. Dolls and paper dolls, miniatures and other delicate things, and Chessie the cat. Lillian frequently wanted to attend plays as long as the dialogue was relatively clean. Go dancing, she had studied ballet herself. Go around shopping malls, and she liked to visit art galleries and attend openings, and always wanted to explore art museums wherever we were. When her vision got bad, she would ask me to read her the labels. Vision was a great fan of films, particularly when the language was relatively clean, and she typically preferred the older ones. She found musicals of the older types especially entertaining as well. She loved restaurants such as those which served tea only in the traditional manner. When Lillian smiled, the world lit up, and she had a notable laugh like her mother. I'm thrilled that Lillian had gotten to Israel several times, and before her last major illnesses, we got to do some major travel, such as to London with Windsor and Paris with Giverny and Versailles. We got to see one of our favorite renowned personalities, Kitty Carlisle Hart, in person twice, once with front row seats when she spoke at Cleveland's International Film Festival, the other in an intimate cabaret in New York where, at age 94, she spoke of her career, told show business-related anecdotes, and sang a series of the old songs. Lillian refrained from interfering with my professional life or the pursuit of my special interests. Sometimes she participated, however, like attending many Western Reserve architectural historians programs. Lillian was religious in her own way, caring, artistic, compassionate, sensitive, conservative, and generous. I shall miss Lillian dearly, and I'm sure many of you will miss her as well, in relation to your own special connections with her. She was definitely one of a kind. There will never, ever be another Lillian. Thank you so much.
Next, I'd like to invite Lillian's brother John to share some personal words about Lillian, followed by her sister-in-law Florence.
I'm Lillian's brother, John Weil. For those who don't know me, and especially for those who do, you may wonder how the son of two post-war Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe would come to have a son named John. The answer is that I was named by a precocious 3.5-year-old named Lillian, who insisted to her parents that I should have a strong American name, like John. In large measure, it was my sister and I who took the role of assimilating our parents into their newly adopted culture. Although baseball seemed to come naturally to my father, who listened on his car or transistor radio to every pitch of every inning the Indians ever played until the day he died, and who, for some reason, never understood that the opposing team was also trying to win the game. Hence, if the Indians scored first or had a one-run lead at any point in the game and wound up losing, he would always spit out his classic line, "They threw it away." Anyway, that precocious 3.5-year-old grew up to be a precocious teenage academic whiz. She was salutatorian, second in her class, for those who haven't kept up with their Latin, in a graduating class of 800. 780 combined SAT score, applied to 2 colleges, MIT and Michigan, got into both. She could have gone to any college she wanted to. The memories I'd like to share with you take place before my sister set off for Ann Arbor. Yes, my name is John, but my Yiddish name is Yehuda Leib. Big difference, the Lion of Judah. Yiddish was the language we most frequently heard growing up, though both of us would also learn to swear quite brazenly in Hungarian, Russian, and Czech. My daughter, who is in Prague working on her dissertation in Slavic studies, would instantly recognize that my sister and I were fluent in mat, a Slavic jargon noted for its extreme and excessive obscenity. My sister's Yiddish name was Liebele, which meant little love or darling, and that's what she was to her young parents. Liebele was born in Fornwald, Germany in 1948, entered this country through the port of Boston before my father learned to hate the Red Sox. Fernwald, like so many geographic entities in 20th century Europe, no longer exists. And this vanishing phenomenon became a recurring motif in our family's life. Fernwald was a DP camp outside of Munich, established in 1945 to shelter the mostly youthful Jews who had survived Nazi Germany's attempts to exterminate them. Fernwald was simply a layover between Europe and, depending on where you might have relatives, America, Israel, Canada, or Argentina. Still, the camp existed longer than any of the other DP camps, closing down for all time in 1957. Vanished, like the shtetls our parents grew up in, like the childhoods that never were for the residents of Fernwald. I vaguely remember the day my parents, and by extension my sister, were naturalized, and that may be because how wildly celebratory my parents were on that proud day. If I actually do, it is likely the earliest memory I have. I think I would have been closer to my sister in our earlier years if she wasn't a girl or I wasn't a boy. As it was, I did boyly things as a child, and Lillian did the girly things. Play with dolls like Betsy Wetsy, bake inedible cookies in her light bulb heated Kenner oven, invite imaginary pixies over to tea with her wee little tea sets and wee little furniture, read Katie Keaton comics, and she loved those oversized books. As Ken mentioned, those cutouts. She would crudely snip out the family members printed on flimsy cardboard that she understood would stand up on their own when liberated from the book, but never did. Not even the little Gentile Scotty dog stood securely, 4 feet notwithstanding. Meanwhile, I played baseball, pickle in the middle, spud, $3, and various other street urchin games. Where my sister and I truly bonded was in the careful, painstaking way she introduced me to what eventually would become the most important thing in my life, the fine arts, music, literature, theater, cinema, even ballet. When I was in grade school, every Friday night was reserved for a trip to the South Euclid Library, the beautiful one nestled in that enormous mansion on Mayfield where the children's room was out of a fairy tale and the music room was like a secret sanctuary from a Sherlock Holmes novel. The library has since been updated to a well-lit place on Green Road, which is reminiscent of a TJ Maxx, but with more help and cleaner bathrooms. In the old music room of that third floor, my sister guided me to Bach, Tchaikovsky, Mozart, Dvorak, Vivaldi, Copland, Stravinsky. I learned the words to every song of every musical, penned by Rodgers and Hammerstein, Lerner and Loewe, Frank Loesser, Irving Berlin. When my father, who always waited patiently or slept soundly in his parked car, drove us home, we would stop to buy Jiffy Pop and invariably blacken half of it on the stovetop while we drooled and watched the aluminum foil balloon out. But it wasn't just the recordings. Lil schlepped me to Cleveland Pops at Public Auditorium. Remember Lewis Lane, anybody? Countless great concerts, but two most memorable, Benny Goodman playing Mozart's Clarinet Concerto and Louis Armstrong being Louis Armstrong. And yes, my father was still the chauffeur because he could always sleep or listen to the ball game in his car. Perhaps the most memorable concert was the first one at Blossom. And I mean the first one, ever. Opening night, 1968. The Cleveland Orchestra under George Zell, all Ludwig van, Consecration of the House Overture, followed by Beethoven's Ninth. I was there solely thanks to my sister, who always included me. Schlepping became my sister's modus operandi, and I was a willing schleppee. When Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival produced its inaugural season in Bunce Auditorium in Lakewood High School, my sister bought us subscriptions. Good seats, too. We were the youngest people in the audience, always. People would stare and point, "Look at those two. Aren't they cute coming to see King Lear?" Great Lakes was just a baby step. Lil schlepped me out of the country for Shakespeare. She booked a flight on an old prop plane. We went to Stratford, Canada, saw Alan Bates and Richard III, and Christopher Plummer, and Zoe Caldwell, and Antony and Cleopatra. Is it any wonder I was a theater major, played Hamlet at 18, and went on to the Yale School of Drama? There's one other memory that keeps coming back to me. I'm not sure how old we were. I was maybe 7 or 8, which would make Lil about 11 at the time. It was a typical Cleveland winter, and 3 feet of snow lay on the ground, which loomed like a wall to us wee kids. We were racking our little brains about what to get our father for his birthday, which was that very day. Our choices were somewhat limited by the fact that we only had 85 cents. But we remained undaunted. What we came up with was pipe cleaners. Those long, fuzz-wrapped, twisted wires that our dad always seemed to be in search of. Pipe cleaners. So we bundled up with hoods and leggings and mittens and hats with ear flaps and trekked half a mile in what seemed like waist-deep snow to the nearest drugstore. Warmth at last. Only one problem. They didn't carry pipe cleaners. So we soldiered on another half mile to the next drugstore, and there, hanging from a rack, were the fattest pipe cleaners we had ever seen. And they were bright white and only 59 cents, a triumph. We barely noticed that the snow was now coming down with tremendous intensity. horizontal, blinding snow. Nevertheless, we happily embarked on the homeward journey through what was now a full-blown blizzard, taking every shortcut we knew through the rapidly piling snow, clutching the little brown paper bag that held our father's gift. Perry and Scott had an easier time reaching the South Pole. At the top of our street, I noticed the little bag was wet, and Lil checked the contents. It was empty. The pipe cleaners lay somewhere behind us and were probably covered by a layer of white. My sister turned to me and said, "White pipe cleaners in the snow." We stood in horror for about 5 seconds and then began to laugh and laugh. White pipe cleaners in the snow would become the perfect metaphor for our vanished childhood and its unfulfilled promises. We gave it our very best, but in the end returned home empty-handed. But, most importantly, we laughed. Back to the theater for a minute. We went to the Cleveland Playhouse a lot. And the sight of so much joy shared between my sister and I scarcely know where to begin recounting our experiences. Brand new Tennessee Williams plays, world premieres, including Paul Zindel's The Effect of Gamma Rays on Man in the Moon Marigolds with Callista Flockhart. Lots of Moliere. You Can't Take It With You, A Case of Libel, which we enjoyed so much we saw it twice. And again, we were always the youngest people in the theater. I'll close my dearest memories of my sister. With our encounter with the performance of the play. Give me a moment. Of the play I personally consider the greatest written in the 20th century. Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. There we were in the 77th Street Playhouse, which was a converted church. 40 years later, it reverted back into a church. An ironically relevant detail of this story, since the church is still there and operational. Anyway, there we were in the 8th row of this converted church on Euclid Avenue, waiting for the show to begin. The youngest members of the audience staring at a stage that was bare except for that iconic, scraggly little tree with a single pathetic leaf hanging on for dear life, for no one but the immortal ghosts of theater, past and present. I can recall from memory the names of every cast member. Richard Oberlin as Dee Dee, the great Jonathan Bolt as Gogo, who now heads up the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, Mario Stiletti as Pazzo, David Shelby as Lucky, and as the boy, Peter Ostrom, which you may remember as the boy who played the title character in the movie Willy Wonka. So there we were. Enter Lucky and Gogo. And Dee Dee's first line, nothing to be done. Within the next few minutes, Lillian and I began to giggle at what was unfolding, and that giggle expanded to laughter, and then just to plain guffawing. The audience around us seemed horrified as they strained earnestly to unearth the subtext and profound meaning of this play. Lil and I were in stitches. Then a strange thing happened. The actors began playing the entire show to me and my sister. It became a private performance to the only two people in the house who figured out what was going on that stage. My apologies. Anyway, we were the only two people who knew what was going on, and they played that whole play just to us. That's just a sliver of all the great things that I remember about my sister. The joy she found in the arts and in sharing that joy with me. Well, the white pipe cleaners vanished forever, and Godot never showed up. But we still managed to laugh. And for my sister, the waiting is over.
Thank you for beautiful words, Florence.
A woman of valor, who can find? She is more precious than fine pearls. Her husband trusts in her, and so he lacks nothing. She does him good, never harm, all the days of her life. She perceives that her labor is rewarding. Her candle burns on into the night. She reaches out to those in need and extends her hands to the poor. She is clothed in strength and dignity, and she faces the future cheerfully. She speaks with wisdom. The laws of kindness is on her lips. Her children rise up to bless her, and her husband sings her praises. Many daughters have done valiantly, but you excel them all. They have in-laws, they have outlaws, I'm an in-law. I am married to Ken's brother, Phil, and in the last 45 seconds I rewrote my whole speech. Thank you very much. Kenneth, you did something I wanted to do. I wanted to make sure that people not only remembered Lillian for her physical limitations and her frail health. I wanted people to know the Lillian I talked to every Sunday morning for 15 years. My first cell phone. We talked. She loved literature. She loved the arts. She loved music. She loved her children. She was a phenomenal companion to her husband. I wanted to make sure this got read for her. She was a doer. She really enjoyed her volunteer work. She collected dolls. She was helping this place with their Madame Alexander doll collection. She was a woman of action. She was a woman of great strength, of excellent superior intellect, but a heart of gold. Hearing John's stories just now, the treasure trove of memories this family has, is more precious than anything. But if you look at the future and you see her children in tradition, in love of the arts, in love of each other, doing, giving, sharing is the greatest gift she gave her family. And her husband Ken, her husband and her brother, his brother, learned from the best. They were phenomenal husbands. Our phenomenal husbands, for which we appreciate, and Lillian certainly did. She had said to me on more than one occasion what good care Ken took of her. She was very appreciative of all she had, but she also gave of herself and contributed to all she had. And she not only has my affection, my love, but also mine and everybody's respect.
And finally, we'll hear from Lillian's daughter, Rachel. Thank you.
Many years ago, I came across an essay my mother wrote when she was studying English at Cleveland State University. It was a comparison between a character in a classic literary work and the biblical Job, subtitled Two Sufferers. The subject of suffering was, for my mother, only in her 20s at the time, already familiar. She never knew her grandparents, and now that I more fully understand the important role my grandparents played in my life, and now in the lives of my own children, I see just how tragic that was. When the Wiles arrived in Cleveland in 1949 with 9-month-old Liba, they had little money, few skills, no English. From the moment she could form letters with a pencil, my mother became the person in the household who took care of many things. Articulate and bright, she did very well in school, earning a scholarship to the University of Michigan. My mother was also a sensitive person, what her mother called a delicate person. And the stresses of college life away from home in the 1960s were difficult for her. But my mother would persevere with her studies. She enjoyed sewing, took my brother and me to the park, baked cookies, and always made special meals for Friday night dinners for Shabbat. Judaism was important to my mother, and through her dedication to observance, my brother and I developed strong Jewish identities. As we got older, my mother shared her love of music and theater with us. She knew a lot about art and culture, and she took Aaron and me to art classes at the Cleveland Museum of Art and to music lessons at the Music School Settlement. She enjoyed traveling and attending classical music concerts and plays. One of her favorite things to do was to go to the cafe at Nordstrom and get tea in a little silver pot. She also enjoyed lunch with friends. She had many friends who brightened her life over the years. I grew up to become a teacher and a writer, and my mother's influence and support helped to make that happen. But of course, my mother was also my teacher, as mothers tend to be, and I learned many important lessons from her. I would like to share some of these lessons with you today. My mother taught me not to take life too seriously, to add a sense of fun to the mundane tasks of life. She used to read a certain Mickey Mouse storybook to me as a little girl and thought it would be fun for our family to recreate the picnic that Mickey and Minnie Mouse had in the book, much to my delight. As a mother myself, I know the drudgery of packing lunches for school, but her brown bag lunches always had a little doodle or a cute note written on them in black marker that brightened my afternoon. She loved her collection of miniatures and her dolls, especially her Revlon doll, which she named Carolyn. One time, she brought Carolyn to her hairdresser and told him she wanted her hair to be the same color as the doll's. Who else would have been so practical, yet so quirky, right? My mother taught me to stand up for myself and to speak my mind. While her brash, outspoken manner was often embarrassing to me as a child, I have come to respect her willingness to say things that other people would hold back. My favorite example of my mother telling it like it is occurred when I was in 8th grade. I reported to my mother that we were being shown an R-rated horror film in study hall at school. She immediately got on the phone with the school and asked to speak to the principal. Amazingly, he apparently came to the phone because I heard him say to him, "Mr. Cipoletti, your ship is sinking." My mother taught me to appreciate the good in people. She enjoyed talking to people in all contexts and from all walks of life. From my mother, I learned that it doesn't matter what someone looks like, how popular or well-connected a person is, that matters. All people are worth getting to know. My mother taught me to persevere. Many years ago, she ran into some difficulties with driving, and she had to retake the driving test in order to keep her license. She worked with the driving instructor to develop strategies for safely maneuvering the car with her diminished eyesight and practiced tirelessly until she was able to do it. She also did the best she could to continue with her household tasks and to volunteer at the local resale shop for many years, even when her eyesight was poor. When I am faced with a difficult task, I think of that and I'm inspired. My mother taught me to love words. When I was a little girl, she read countless books to me, many of which she remembered from her own childhood. She could recite Shakespeare, loved the poetry of John Keats, and had very strong feelings about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. She did not like it. She once wrote a short story for children about a princess named Rachel, which she sent to Cricket magazine. The magazine did not accept it for publication, but they did send her a very encouraging letter, and she subscribed to the magazine for Aaron and me for many years, and now I subscribe to it for my children. In recent years, she renewed her interest in writing, authoring several novellas and a memoir, which she shared with friends. She's had a difficult time speaking. She was not able to speak as she wanted to in recent years. So I thought I would leave you with some of the words from her novella that she called Dove. It's actually a story about a dancer named Daniel who meets a woman named Deborah, and a lot of it is pretty lighthearted. But this is how it begins. I'll just read you the first page or so. Sharp, jagged peaks pierced the water. The dove flew over the sea and the emerging land, seeking sanctuary. She found none. She flew back to the ark. Noah had been standing watchful on the deck. When he sighted the dove, he extended his arm. The grateful dove fluttered down onto his hand. Patience, he whispered to her. 7 days the dove remained on the ark. She nibbled on grain, she groomed her feathers, she cooed to her mate. Then Noah came, opened her cage, and released her into the sky. By now the wind had blown the water into clumps. The trees, greener than ever before, or since because of their submersion in the fertile ooze, were reaching for the heavens once more. The dove spied the tip of an olive tree. She circled it in ecstasy, then landed on a limb. She wanted to bring something back to Noah. He had been so kind to her and all the other creatures on the ark. Carefully, with her beak, she snipped off a branch that had a cluster of shiny olives clinging to it. Without losing a beat of her wings, she ascended with the branch in her beak and joyfully returned to the ark. Noah was waiting on the deck, this time surrounded by his family, his wife, his 3 sons, and his 3 sons' wives. They clapped their hands in excitement as the dove approached bearing the olive branch in her mouth. One of the olives fell, rolling down the ark's planks. Shem's wife spotted it, and having had no fresh food for days, popped it in her mouth. She felt a strange burning sensation in her gut. The olive pit embedded as a seed within her that would be passed down through the generations and would remain dormant. The now happy dove remained another 7 days to tell her story to the other inhabitants of the ark. Then released once again by Noah, she never returned. Thank you.
Thank you all for your beautiful, touching words. Birth is a beginning and death a destination. But life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity, and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. But life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage to life everlasting. Amen. Now I'd like to invite Aaron to come forward to read El Malay Rachamim. If you're able, I ask you to please rise for his final prayer.
El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tacha, Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kadoshim Utorim, Zohar Harakia Maschirim et Nishmat, Liba Esther Bat David Vasara, Shahalcha Leolama, Bal Harachamim, Yastireha Baseter Kanafav Leolamim, Bitzor Bitzror Hachayim, Et Nishmata, Adonai Hu Nachalata, V'tanuach B'shalom Al Mishkava V'nomar, Amen.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to our beloved Lillian Goldberg, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance, may she rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. You may be seated for just a moment. We will conclude our service here. We'll proceed from here to Beit Olam Cemetery for burial. And following burial, the family will be receiving visitors at their residence, 3412 Ormond Road in Cleveland Heights. After services today until 6, and Sunday through Thursday from 2 to 4 and 6 to 8 p.m. Thank you.